LGBTQIA plus is an inclusive acronym that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersexual, ally, or asexual. And then the plus is for anyone else who may not yet be included, pansexual or otherwise. It is thundering like crazy right now. So please hang in there with me. We are still in a pandemic. We are still protesting for the human rights of Black people. That is long overdue. We are patiently and not so patiently waiting to cast our ballots come this November, and then for some people in New York tomorrow. And Lord knows we're ready to be set free from our homes, our pain, our anger, our frustration. And today we are talking about mental health and discrimination, and also as it relates to the LGBTQIA plus community and the pandemic of hate they have endured for years. I'm already emotional, especially Black trans people and queer people of color. Today we are raising money for the Stonewall Foundation, and I was lucky enough to be at Pride last year in New York and go to the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. And as a cis female, I don't understand the struggle and I don't understand the pain, but I can see the love in all of my friends who are part of this community, and I want to open up this conversation. And so I just have some facts before we bring on my therapist, who is a member of the LGBTQIA plus community. He is an incredible human being. I found him through the Actors Fund. Thank God for you, Bobby. He's going to join us in a minute. And I just want to talk about some cold hard facts, okay? According to the TDOR from transrespect.org. TDOR stands for Transgender Day of Remembrance. Their 2019 update has revealed that there was a total of 331 cases of reported killings of trans and gender diverse people between October 1st, 2018 and September 30th, 2019. The majority of those murders occurred in Brazil, Mexico, and the United States, adding up to a total of 3,314 hateful deaths and reported cases in 74 countries worldwide between January 1st, 2008 and September 30th of 2019. Now, I know this is a heavy topic for Monday, but we got to get uncomfortable together. In the United States, the majority of trans people reported murdered are trans women of color and Native American women. I know that everything that has been going on in the world has been extremely overwhelming. I think mainly because we are all sitting at home and we can see everything. We can soak it all up in a way we're not able to do necessarily because, you've got to block some things out. When you take it all in, it's overwhelming, right? So even if you mean to or not, you're blocking out people that are dying. You're blocking out people that are being discriminated against. You can use your privilege to help that, go away so we can help people. The veil has been lifted, you guys. The veil has been lifted. And now, because it's been lifted, the burden and necessity of being accountable are there. So you can't look away, and therefore our minds are racing. The people who want to help with systemic racism and racial injustice and mass incarceration and the hate crimes against queer transgender people, I understand you're racing to want to help and fix and read and act. And I think one of the main things we need to do is also just sort of stop for a second and just talk about how we can do better collectively to show up in a more compassionate way. So right now, I'm going to welcome Bobby Stegert. He is my therapist. He's going to come into the chat, and we're going to talk about it all right now. So thank you, Quarantine But Cute. I'm Lala, and we would love to take your donations for Stonewall. Hi.
Hi.
You got a haircut.
Oh yeah, we speak on the phone, so you haven't seen the do.
I know, and sometimes I wonder, do we speak on the phone? Because I'm afraid for you to see what I look like in the morning? Probably.
It's okay. That's understandable.
I cut my own bangs, so, we got the haircut life coming on. I'm about to break and go see my hairstylist, but we'll see. So thank you for coming on today. We are talking about LGBTQIA plus community. You are a member of that community, as well as you treat people in your practice as a therapist that are not only trans, but they're minorities. And I want to talk to you about what we can do better collectively to show up in a compassionate way. But before we sort of talk about that, I want to talk directly to everybody about how do we deal with this overwhelm of information and sadness, and for many, rage in our everyday lives, and specifically concerning mental health.
Well, I think we're all coming out of sort of a crisis point. And so the first part of COVID and then into the huge upheaval, necessary upheaval of the Black Lives Matter movement has been about just sort of responding instinctually to the moment and sort of being in survival mode. And I think now it's about sort of channeling that energy into real directional purpose.
Yeah.
And I heard what you said about us sitting around and having all this pent up energy. Well, we can use it, and we can use
Absolutely.
it through really conscious efforts towards improving ourselves and coming together and improving our society. And I think that will get us out of the mess that we're in.
Right. And I think, we've been seeing a lot of memes and people saying, get comfortable being uncomfortable and having those direct conversations. And I implore everybody to at least have one conversation a week, whether it's with a cisgendered person or a trans person or your mom or your grandma or your grandpa or, someone you barely know, saying, hey, I'm not asking you to educate me, but I would like to talk to you about what's happening. And maybe that's an open channel,
Yeah, so much of the work right now it should and must be personal and with our closest loved ones. I mean, I think social media is beautiful, and people from all across the world are coming together in a virtual way.
Yeah,
but the internal work, we are all living in a racist, misogynist, and homophobic society. We are all socialized to be racist, misogynistic, and transphobic, homophobic. And so there's a lot of work that we as individuals and with our families can do that's just as important.
So then what are the tools we can use, or what do we need to combat the exhaustion and the frustration and then the confrontation? What do you use in your therapy when someone's having trouble speaking to somebody, but it's paining them and they need to say something, regardless of how it's going to come out,
Yeah, I think
making mistakes,
absolutely. I think it's about the acceptance of imperfection in a very new experience. And it's about knowing that you'll mess up. It's about accepting that you and others will mess up, and still being brave enough to move forward with the very real perception that you might be imperfect.
Yeah. I definitely have made mistakes already, even in some of my first shows, addressing these issues and these long time systemic issues. And I think I even, I'm outing myself by saying this. I think I even said to one of the chefs on my show, who happens to be a Black woman, I said to her, because I was in tears about everything after George Floyd, like many of us. And I said, on behalf of all white people, I apologize. And it's like, now that I look back, I'm like, oh, I don't know if that was careless, careful, or whatever, but we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay.
Yeah. And you need to give yourself the grace to keep on learning and improving. And by giving yourself that grace, you can have the energy to move forward.
Right. And I think, so when it comes to marginalized groups such as LGBTQIA and Black and Brown communities, how is their mental health treatment different, as you've seen and you've observed, from non-Black and Brown people and LGBTQIA communities, and how they've been suppressed and what's changing, if anything?
It's so complicated.
I know.
I mean, the most egregious example I can give you is that, for my trans identified clients, I am required to diagnose them with a mental illness in order for their insurance to cover something like a surgery. So something like, a gender affirming surgery. Yeah. I mean, the way that our whole mental health system is set up is that the insurance companies and big pharmaceutical industry control every aspect of it. And so we are required to have all these categories for how someone is suffering, and it's considered a mental illness. And only through that category can someone get treatment. So
to break that down then, so for example, if someone, let's say my stepdad who has diabetes, he has a pre-existing condition, his insurance may naturally be higher so he's discriminated against when it comes to having a disease, right? But
Mm-hmm.
this is a human being who's just trying to live in the way that they see fit, in the way they identify, and they're being discriminated against just to get insurance and be covered that way.
Yeah, by nature, they have to technically be considered mentally ill, which is just a bunch of bullshit. And
That's
it's the only option a mental health professional has in order to get them the treatment that they deserve through their insurance.
whew, this is a
Yeah.
lot. There's so many changes that have to be made, and I think, for me, my own veil, even being an ally or whatever you want to call it, I just call it being a human being that accepts people, for whatever they want to be and whoever they are, regardless. This is just, yeah, it's overwhelming. So then, as far as the trans community and Black trans people especially, we've got a long way to go, right? We've got to keep unveiling, and so many trans people are in harm's way, and they're not criminals, and they're painted as criminals, and they're painted as a completely different category, separate from the LGBTQ IA plus community. Even though they're a part of that group, they're pushed aside even in their own community. So these are human beings just trying to live their lives. What is your thought on that, in general?
I mean, the like supreme irony of it all is that trans people of color were at the very front lines when it came to the gay liberation
It's
movement.
true.
People within the community know the names of like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. These are women of color, trans
Yep.
women of color. These people were at Stonewall and actually were the very first people to rise up against police brutality, against the LGBT community. So the irony that trans people of color are the people who are most abused, most vulnerable, is horrifying. And you speak to the point that white supremacy and transphobia is alive and well in the LGBT community. This is not a problem, only in dominant society. This is a prominent problem within the minority community as well. And so it's about checking your own privilege even within the community, and committing to the idea that the community is only as healthy as the most vulnerable person in it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for so many years, when it doesn't affect you, even if you're supportive of gay rights, or you're gay and you're supportive of inclusivity, if a trans person's insurance doesn't affect you, you don't become an activist for people who are having these issues.
yeah, and that's the problem with sort of the myth of American individualism, this idea that you strike out and do everything on your own in America and you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Well, that's just not possible for marginalized people. I can hear you now. There you are.
Yeah, we have a wild thunderstorm here. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you now.
Okay, let me know if it gets a little crazy.
Okay.
So to your thought, can you keep going a little bit more with that? You got cut off.
Um, where did you hear me stop talking?
Was talking about marginalized people within the LGBTQIA plus community, and how I was saying that, even if you're a member of that community, there's still so much, non-acceptance of transgender people.
Yeah, and I think what I was saying was that white supremacy and transphobia are very alive and well within the community as well. This is not something that is just true of the dominant community or the dominant society.
Okay.
And
So to that, then when it comes to mental health care, I mean, we can talk about this for everybody, regardless of what you identify with. But I think specifically with the fact that you're telling me that trans people have to be diagnosed with a mental illness in order to get a surgery or get a treatment is mind-blowing. And I bet a lot of people don't know that, because it's not something I learned until recently, watching Disclosure and different documentaries to educate myself. I didn't call, you know, my friend's friend who's trans or my non-binary friend and ask them to educate me. I'm doing it on my own. It's exhausting
Mhm.
for these people who've been dealing with it forever. So it's our turn, right? So when it comes to mental health, what can be reformed right now?
Well, one of my big questions about mental health reform is why so many, mental illnesses are characterized by a cluster of symptoms and
Hmm.
never takes into account past experiences
Yeah.
and traumatic experiences. Um, so much about depression and anxiety in our culture is treated with a pill or with a quick diagnosis of a cluster of symptoms. But it's my belief that so much mental illness has to do with unstable childhoods, with traumatic experiences. So one of the major things that I think needs to happen is a new diagnostic category around childhood trauma. People have been pushing for it. It's come close to being a diagnosable disorder that then gets treatment and then therefore insurance coverage. But the idea of complex trauma, complex childhood trauma, is still yet to be included in the mental health
And right.
canon, if you will.
And when you say complex trauma, like, does that include abandonment?
It includes abandonment. It includes long-term sexual, physical, or emotional or psychological abuse. It involves any long-term neglect of a young person, and I think that's what most leads to the mental illness epidemic in our country.
So when it comes to keeping communities of marginalized people together, what is the one major strategy that has seemed to work so far and unite people? Because yes, we're seeing a lot of hate and a lot of people come out of the woodwork, but there's a lot of beautiful, beautiful communities in the world that are fighting for the justice and have been for a long time. Whether it's racial injustice or injustice against gay men and women, bisexual, even just understanding, like pronouns, the whole idea of pronouns, that making that not a scary thing to talk about by talking about it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what is sort of, and strategy is a weird word, but what's something that's working and uniting as a people? Because we are seeing people stand up in a way in so many movements that we never have before.
I think, and this is especially true for the LGBT community, it's about intergenerational sharing. It's about knowing where you have come from. And the real disability in the LGBT community is that it's a community that is not built on actual biological family. So you have to find your elders. You have to find people who are your chosen family, and you have to learn from them. So, in my own personal case, the most rich educational experiences I've had are with gay men in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who can teach me about what the AIDS crisis was, how the gay and lesbian community came together to battle AIDS when the entire federal government ignored it. And through those sharing, through that intergenerational sharing, I have such an appreciation for the sacrifices that people before me made. And it makes me feel that I'm part of a continuum, so that I can look to the next generation and help them in the acceptance of and embracing of their sexuality and gender identity.
And
The same is true for the Black Lives Matter movement as well,
yeah,
of course.
yeah. And so, okay, so for example, in my life, I'm a cis mixed female. I'm half Hispanic. My sexual orientation is that I prefer men. I've been with women as well. So I don't know if I qualify for questioning under the
It's up to
queer
you.
questioning. It doesn't really matter. My point is, I was very lucky to grow up in a town that's in the South, but my mom was a Spanish teacher, and all of her friends, her best friend who raised me was this incredible lesbian woman from Brazil named Lucia. Well, I didn't figure out that she was a lesbian until I was 13. I just loved being around her. I loved being around her friends. I remember when I was 13 and I figured it out, because she would have like naked structures of women everywhere all the time. And I always thought, ooh, I'm so fascinated by her, this exotic Brazilian woman that my mom is like best friends with. And eventually I figured it out, and it never bothered me. And I remember they tried to have like a conversation with me about it. I was like, I know she's gay. Like, like to me, it was nothing because it's the environment in which I grew up in, a very open LGBT community. And my
You're
mom is a
lucky
cis.
there.
I'm very lucky.
Mhm.
I'm very lucky. And so not everybody has that cultural experience as well. I mean, these people were from all over the world. We're not just talking about American gay men and women. We're talking about people from Colombia, Spain, Brazil. I was so blessed to have that upbringing. And I think for the people who don't have that, this is intense right now. All of this is intense. And I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying, you know, that I'm not saying anything. I'm just recognizing it, you know? And for me, what I can do with my platform is raise awareness and continue to learn because I don't know everything about trans people. I don't know everything about the gay community just because I support them. You know, we really need to dive into that, but it's hard because you can't tell people what to do. You can only lead by example. So that's why I wanted you on the show because you're my therapist. I feel vulnerable with you. I think being vulnerable with people is the most important gift. Storytelling, speaking to your elders that have been there before, like you said. And so my other question was, you know, when we're all fighting for this, regardless of cis, gay, lesbian, transgender, what are some ways when we're overwhelmed or just in general, we can step back while still standing up for what is right?
I think it goes back to the notion that there is work that is visible and outward, and then there is work that is private and inward. And
Right.
I don't think one is more important than the other. I think, you know, we all contribute to the structure of racism and homophobia and transphobia in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and so it might be necessary to step back and to self-examine. And that can be a reprieve from the more outward facing work and then vice versa.
So we can take care of ourselves. I mean, it goes back to like self-care, right? How do
Yeah.
we take care of ourselves in a time where we feel like we have to act now? Where Black people are saying to white people, wake up, we've been awake, you know? And there's so many things to see and research. It's like, it reminds me of that moment in The Fifth Element where Lilu doesn't speak English and she's looking at the computer and she sees war and all these images for the first time. She's discovering what our Earth is, right? And she's so overwhelmed by the pain of it all that she just loses it. And I feel like that's happening a lot for people right now, no matter what side you're on, no matter what race you are, no matter what group you identify with. So let's go back to the basics of self-care and mental health. Can we just talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, it's so simple, but I often think about, I keep coming back to that notion of, you know, putting on your oxygen mask before assisting others with
Yeah.
theirs, the sort of the plane metaphor.
Yeah.
And, you know, what good are you towards others if you are not, you know, taking care of yourself? And if you want to make long-term change in this world, and if you want to really put your energies towards making that positive change, you have to be taking care of yourself at the same time. And if you're privileged enough to be able to do that, I think that's something that that should be definitely part of the mix.
And do you think people just personally, not as a therapist, I mean, that they need to, there's a lot of like white guilt, right? And other guilt for not supporting different causes. Do you believe that people have to speak up to be involved?
I think it's an individual choice, but the most important thing that we can do is educate ourselves about the reality versus sort of the myth of the culture that we live in. I think that's the most important thing we can all do. We were all fed a story about what it is to be American, and we are all waking up to the fact that there are incredible disparities in American culture, and there always have been.
Yeah.
And so however you get there, I think, to me, that's the most important shift.
Right. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So what is the issue in sessions that come up most in the LGBTQIA plus community that you can speak about, or one of the greatest conflicts many of your patients may experience?
Shame.
Hmm.
Plain and simple, shame. You know, the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is, oh shit, I did something wrong. I made a mistake. Shame is, oh, there is something deeply and inherently wrong with me. And how could you not feel that way if the message you get from media, your church, your family, your school, your peers, everyone in this culture, that there is something inherently wrong with who you are inherently as a person? And what's so heartbreaking about shame is that it closes you off. It makes you fearful. It can lead to substance abuse. It leads to all kinds of self-perpetuating behavior and responses that are meant to protect you, but that actually keep you away from the things that can heal you.
Right.
And so the most important thing when working with LGBT people is to address that shame, to explore where it came from, where that messaging originates, and then to start building up a sense of self that is affirming and that is accepting and that is celebrating of who one
The story
is.
you tell yourself, right? Brene Brown always talks about that. The story that you tell yourself. Like the story I tell myself is I'm not skinny enough and I'm never going to find someone who really loves me. And the moment that I find someone I love, I'm going to run away because I don't deserve it. And that's my daddy abandonment issues and my body shaming and body dysmorphia issues. So, you know, I have a lot to work on too. And we are working through that, you know, in our sessions. But I mean, we all have issues, right? But the difference between me having issues and someone that doesn't have privilege like me is exorbitant. And
that's the story you tell yourself, but your church, family, community, and the entire American culture is not necessarily saying the same story.
Right. So are there resources that you can share for minority mental health and LGBTQIA plus today? I can maybe type some in the comments as well. If there's like, it doesn't have to be a hotline, but websites or just, you know, if people can't afford insurance, how can they get to somebody like you?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a hotline. I think the Trevor Project is the best resource for LGBT youth. It's a suicide hotline, but it's so much more than that. And it is a resource that anyone in the entire country can use if they're ever feeling vulnerable, scared, or in danger.
And is that for everybody? I mean, obviously it's specifically created for LGBTQIA plus community, but if someone had no outlet, could they call? I mean, in a way, suicide hotline, is it
it's specifically for LGBT people.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about pronouns for a minute.
Sure.
Pronouns are something that even when I first heard someone say in a play I was in a few years ago, my pronouns are they and them, I looked up. We were in a reading and I wasn't judging it. I literally didn't understand like what this person meant. So can we talk about pronouns for a minute?
Sure.
And cis versus non-cis people and what that means? Because I truly believe that only in the last year or so, people that are not in the LGBTQIA plus community are starting to understand what those words mean.
Yeah, I work with some older clinicians who are having trouble adjusting because it just wasn't part of the lexicon, you know?
Correct.
So what is your understanding of being cisgendered?
So my understanding of being cisgendered is that I identify as someone who was born with female genitals. I am a woman and my sexual orientation is different, right, from my gender.
It has nothing to do with sexual orientation. This is where it can get confusing.
Well, no, I know that. I'm just saying my full-on categories, right? But a cisgendered person is someone who is not gay, lesbian, pansexual, bisexual. Is that correct or no?
No. So for example, I'm gay, but I'm cisgendered. So cisgendered means that your biological sex at birth matches your gender identity.
Oh, see, look, the more you know. So then I'm a cisgendered female.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then sexual orientation is like a whole nother category. It's a whole nother consideration.
And that is who you prefer to be with intimately.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so let's talk about pronouns. Obviously, there's she, her, hers, which is what I identify as. There's he, his, his.
Him.
He, his. Thank you. God, I need to go back to school. And then there's they and them, which is attached to only non-binary people? Or how does that work?
Well, it could be attached to anyone who doesn't want to be particularly identified as male or female. And what's confusing about it is that grammatically, to our ears in English, it sounds like a plural.
Mm-hmm. As a group of people.
Right. And so I think that's one of the adjustments we have to make. It's just a grammatical adjustment. But the other is that the gender binary in our culture is incredibly rigid. So, we come from like Protestant stock. America was built on these very conservative ideas about a lot of things. But in gender, our culture, a man is one thing and he behaves a certain way and has sex with certain people and has certain jobs and you name it. And then a woman on the other end of the spectrum, identifies in all these other different ways. And so they, them is a challenge to the gender binary that structures our entire culture.
Yeah, it's a dictionary. And I think people see new and they've already had their schedule and their pattern and their routines. And like I said, I wasn't like, maybe I even did say, oh, that's so dumb. I'm sure I said something, because when you don't know something and you're not educated about something, you're like, well, why would you do that?
Sure.
I think that's the first thing. It's because you fear the unknown, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this person who I admired as an actor, when they said they, them, I was like, but what does that mean? Do you know what I
Right.
mean? And I learned through that play 3 years ago what that meant. And I think anyone can call themselves anything. You know what I mean? Like, who gives a shit? Like, why are you wasting your energy about someone else's life? Fuck off. Like, I don't have time to worry about what you're doing, because it's not affecting me in a way that's affecting my own gender. If you want to be that gender, be that gender. If you want
Mm-hmm.
to, I'm not saying I'm not worried about the things that are affecting them as a whole, being minorities or people who have been brutally killed because the fact that they've chosen to be gay, or not chosen to be, are gay, are lesbian, transgender. Those things are so important to stand up for this community that is marginalized. But it is difficult, and I'm not going to sit there and pretend that I have it all figured out and that I know everything and that, well, I'm just fine because I watched that one documentary, and I think that's the thing, is everybody's putting up their black square and everyone's saying happy pride, because they want to go along with the Joneses. And I can't speak for everybody because I'm not God and I'm not a telepathic genius. I don't know what everyone's thinking, but that's why I was saying, how can we collectively show up in a more compassionate way when we don't understand and we feel like we need to put it in a box?
Yeah. I mean, what I keep thinking about these days, especially when it comes to transphobia and homophobia, is that it really is a mirror to the larger society and to people's real fear of transgressing gender and sexual norms, people's terror at what it would mean to admit to and acknowledge the complexity in their own gender identity and their own sexual identity. And so something that we can all do is really think about what sexual or gender stereotypes we perpetuate, even if we're not trans, even if we're not LGBT. What is your expectation of a woman or a man that keeps the gender binary rigid in your experience?
Yeah, I have to look a certain way for a man to be attracted to me. If I'm too strong, they're going to run away. Too opinionated, too much. I've been told I'm too much my
Mm-hmm.
whole life. So I've dialed myself back for certain men because I wanted to be loved and I wanted the attention. I mean, there's so much there.
Right.
Yeah, no, there's so
And
much there.
it's all connected. Our fear of messing up the boundaries and treating people as human beings that don't necessarily depend upon these categories of male and female, gay or straight, is what is keeping people so resistant to accepting and embracing people who could be our teachers.
Yeah.
Trans individuals could be our teachers if we let them. They could teach us about what gender can mean in a much more fluid, human, and complex way.
And, really funny example, maybe not funny, I don't want to sound disrespectful, but the porn community. I watched the AVN Awards last night, And
Hmm.
I first thought, oh my God, it's a bunch of ditzes up on stage being bubbly and whatever. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm so jealous of their open sexuality and how they are honoring what they do in a way that I've never seen before. Like to really watch the full award show, they have zero shame.
Exactly. And
That's okay.
what a radical idea to embrace our sexualities openly, and to celebrate our sexualities, to do it responsibly, but to do it openly, and to do it with joy and with an aim towards connecting with others. I mean, that's what the LGBT community has to teach to the rest of the world.
Totally. I mean, I personally still have issues with couples who try to get me into their open relationships, but that's a whole other thing because I want someone for my own, and then maybe we'll invite someone.
That's a separate issue, perhaps.
That's a
Yeah.
separate issue. But so to end this, I would love to talk about the positive actions right now that you're seeing within the LGBTQIA plus community, and how cis men and women that are not a part of that group. Now I understand a cisgendered gay man. It makes, thank you for that. Can help themselves become more educated and create a safe allyship for their fellow human.
Yeah. A lot of it is checking privilege and looking at where you land in the ecosystem of a community. If you are a straight, cisgendered white person, you are living in the very center of a world that was built for you, and that the entire perspective of the world was made for your comfort. It's important to locate yourself in the middle of that story, and then to look at where other people might land, and put yourself in their shoes and imagine what it's like to be in a world that does not make them feel safe, a world that does not make them feel like they can be who they are without fear of threat or violence. And then to, through that point of empathy, decide what you want to do about it.
And I think that's the right word, empathy. I've always considered myself an empath, but now it's on a whole different level.
Yeah,
It's
there's empathic energy with the people around you, and then there's empathic energy towards the system you're in. And I think you are taking a big telescope back and looking at society in a much larger way.
yeah, I'm not going to sit here and guilt myself and say, oh, Lauren, you fucked up and you're this and you're that. I'm just going to say, well, now I'm learning. And now I'm going forward and I'm being vocal about it. And I'm checking not only my privilege, I'm checking the way I speak. I'm checking other people around me in a way that I'm not attacking them. And I think that's something very important, especially dear white people. I'm going to have a dear white people moment from a white person to a white person. I'm half Hispanic, but no one ever sees that. So I'm going to just talk about my privilege here for a minute. It is so important not to bash other people on social media about what you know and what you've just learned, and you know you're not doing enough and I'm doing this. you know I was attacked recently by a friend, and I was just like, I don't really need that right now. I don't need you to give me a whole lesson on education when you're a white female. You know what I mean? Like I'm doing my work and we can talk about it, but I think it can get very divisive, and you've got to be very careful about not trying to teach people and allow people to learn on their own. I mean, look at relationships. When you push somebody, what do? They run. They walk away. So it's giving people within your own community, even if it's a mixed community of a lot of different people, that space to be heard, and that space to express, and then space for yourself to say, okay, I took my lesson for the day. I'm going to sit on that and marinate on it before I go chitter chat to everybody else about what I've just learned.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between showing your work and doing the work. And social media is a place where people like to show their work. And I think it's more important to focus on doing it.
I do too. I mean, that's what these conversations are for. I mean, I've been doing it for 15 weeks now. It's for me to learn. I've just realized that there's 3 or 4 things I had no clue about that I just learned in this conversation. And your openness and willingness to help educate me in a non-threatening way is exactly how we need to be having these conversations. So, Bobby, I really appreciate you being here today.
So
And
welcome.
You are the best therapist ever. And if anybody out there is an actor like myself, I did find volunteer fund. We were hoping to raise some money for Stonewall today, and you can watch the show again on Quarantine But Cute. I appreciate all your work, all of your clarifications on things that people may not be aware of, and we just have to keep fighting the good fight.
That's right. We'll keep going.
Thank you so much for being here. Bye, everybody. Have an awesome week,
Bye.
and talk to
See
you
ya.
soon.